This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast.
Yeah.
Ooh, Dylan, that was a crazy little noise. You sounded like kind of like a cute little demon.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Thank you all so much for joining us here today, citizens. We are in for one hell of an episode, and we are happy to have you along with us on this journey.
Oh, yes.
Please, if you're a fan of the show, please like, rate, subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend about us, tell a family member, tell a foe even about us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we really appreciate all that you do to spread the good word of Creep Street and to keep us going. You also can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Creep Street Podcast. Twitter at Creep Street Pod.
Yes.
We're also on TikTok. I think we're technically on Pinterest too. I mean, guys, we're all over the dang place. You
Amen.
know, the ding dong place. We're all over it. And on our Facebook page, we have a subgroup called Citizens of the Milky Way. We highly recommend you check that out. Mm-hmm. And if one episode a week is not enough for you, if you're still itching for a little bit more, you need a little bit more of that Creep Street content.
You know you need it. Come on.
We have just the thing for you. All you got to do is head over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. And there you will find all sorts of fantastic bonus content. Yes, we have 3 separate tiers, $2 a month, $5 a month, and $10 a month. And all of those tiers will get you bonus material, whether that be full bonus episodes, movie reviews, movie commentary, short stories, really anything is up on there. We really recommend you go ahead and check that out if you're a Creep Street head, all of you citizens of the Milky Way.
Oh, yes.
Now, last week, we went to the movies.
Oh, we sure did. Had a night at the movies.
We had a blast over at the movie theater talking about some cursed movie sets. Now, we had a blast there. We heard some weird stuff. We heard of some things that maybe could have something to do with the paranormal.
Yeah, maybe. Some certainly. I would think a took especially. Yeah, it's just something weird. I mean, not to say it is, but just, you know what I mean. It's just weird just how the coincidence of it.
Oh, so weird. But today we're diving deep into the paranormal.
Oh, yeah, we're getting real freaky today, folks.
We're going for it. We're going for it big time. Dylan, please, will you tell the people what we're jumping into today?
Today, we're talking about the haunting of the Wyrick house. Ooh, let me pour this oil on your back and lightly apply some pressure. Oh, with these sources.
Ooh, okay.
First was a documentary called The Girl in Georgia Who Communicated with the Dead, A Haunting in Georgia by Timeline, and an article on Mysterious Universe, The Eerie Unsolved Case of the Wyrick House by Brent Swancer at Mysterious Universe.
That's right.
So our story picks up in the good old year of 1989.
Oh, the year of Dylan's birth.
That's right, in the American state of Georgia. Now, out in this rural area is a quaint town called Ellerslie. And in the town of Ellerslie stands a modest, one-story, 3-bedroom brick house with a spacious yard. And the focus of our story today concerns the Wyrick family. At that time, in 1989, Andy and Lisa Wyrick were a young married couple with a 3-year-old daughter named Heidi. And up until that point, they had always lived in apartments or rented housing. And for the last year, the family had been searching for a simple house that they could make their dream home. They wanted a place that was safe, of course, and when they found this place, it was like a dream come true. 3 bedrooms was perfect. One for Andy and Lisa, one for Heidi, and of course, one for a guest room or whatever else you might want to use it for.
That's right.
Not to mention a spacious yard where Heidi could play, and given the house's rural location, her parents could really let her play without worrying too much. Now, what was interesting was that it seemed as though the previous owners had just up and left the house with no reason as to why they abandoned it. But the Wyricks never asked why. They were just so happy to have found the place. And when I mean abandoned, it wasn't like run down and shitty.
Right.
It was just literally, it was like people had just up and left the place. But when they saw it, the Wyrick family saw it, they felt it was perfect. In short order, the family had bought the place and moved on in and began the process of making it their own. Now, one drawback was that because of the rural area, the rural location, there really weren't any other kids in the vicinity that Heidi could really play with. But Andy and Lisa were happily surprised when Heidi seemed to take to the place just as well as they did, often playing in the spacious yard, playing with her toys, and having make-believe adventures, as a 3-year-old would.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it was a day in March, and Heidi was out playing in the yard, and Lisa's just doing various chores around the house while Heidi's out there playing. And there was even, I guess, an old swing hanging from a tree that she would swing from as well. Now, since they had moved in, Lisa noticed that Heidi seemed to have developed an imaginary friend. Often, when Heidi was out in the yard playing, Lisa would overhear her talking to someone. Now, obviously, this didn't strike her as strange, as her daughter was 3, and given that they lived in a remote area, it's no surprise that she may have created an imaginary friend to play with. Kids do it all the time, even if they don't live in a rural, isolated place.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, on this day, Lisa took a moment to really listen in on one of these conversations that Heidi would have with her imaginary friend. And she noticed that it wasn't just small talk. It was like long conversations she would be having with this other person. And of course, Lisa wouldn't hear another voice talking back to her or see anyone else out there. But curious, Lisa asked Heidi who this friend was she was talking to, and Heidi told her that his name was Mr. Gordy. She said he was an old man with gray hair and a black suit and a top hat. Now, right away, this kind of caught Lisa's attention. Sure, kids have imaginary friends, but their imaginary friends are usually also around the same age. They're usually kids or they're mythical creatures. You know what I mean? They're creatures, they're not...
You really don't expect some old man
to
be your daughter's imaginary friend. It's very weird.
Exactly. Why would a 3-year-old girl come up with an imaginary friend that was an old man named Mr. Gordy? When she pressed her with more questions, Heidi told her that Mr. Gordy would visit her and play with her in her room and out in the yard. That's when Lisa made a connection in her own mind. Often her and Heidi would go for walks around the area just to get some exercise. Obviously, Heidi would hold her mother's hand, but she noticed that Heidi's other hand would sometimes be held out as if holding another person's hand that she couldn't see. Well, now it kind of dawned on Lisa how often Heidi would actually play with this imaginary friend. She didn't really notice it much when she thought it was all fun and games, but now she was realizing that this Mr. Gordy was apparently almost always around. On top of that, Heidi told her mother that Mr. Gordy had said there was money buried away somewhere on the property. Well, this unsettles Lisa a little bit, but she wants to be supportive of her 3-year-old daughter, especially since they had just made a big move, and who knows what a move like that, what kind of effect it has on a 3-year-old child. So she just wanted to go along with it and be supportive. For example, Andrew, the husband, he would work during the day, so it would be just Lisa and Heidi at home. When it was lunchtime, Lisa would prepare an extra plate of food for Mr. Gordy. And of course, the food would be left uneaten. But she always just made it just to make sure she was being supportive.
That's cute, maybe.
Lisa was quoted saying, "I would see her out in the yard and see her hand raised, holding someone's hand. Many times I would hear her talking, but never heard anybody talk back." Well, this was all well and good until one day another visitor came. Lisa was in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. A few minutes later, Heidi came into the kitchen to where her mother was, and Heidi looked kind of unnerved. She said, "Mommy, there's a man at the door named Khan. She said his shirt seemed to be covered in blood and his hand looked hurt. Well, right away, Lisa's like, what the fuck? She races to the front door, which is just wide open, but she gets there, and of course, no one's there, and there's no one out in the yard either. But what's interesting is she apparently did hear a doorbell ring. Or it wasn't just like Heidi playing, someone's at the door. Like, apparently she heard the doorbell ring.
Right.
Unless Heidi rang it herself as part of the, the fantasy. But yeah, interesting.
Very weird.
Well, this was just a bit too far, and Lisa's afraid that maybe someone's trying to kidnap Heidi or something, and so she calls Andy at work, and Andy leaves work immediately and drives right home. Once he gets there, he grabs a gun from the family's gun safe and gets back in his truck, and he starts looking around the area, trying to find anyone covered in blood. Obviously, someone who is covered in blood would stick out like a sore thumb, but of course, he couldn't find anybody. He even asked neighbors if they had seen anyone in the area that fit that description, and they hadn't either. Once again, kids may have multiple imaginary friends, but now there are two that are adults, and one is covered in blood, and his name is Khan.
Yeah, I mean, this is very fucking weird.
Very weird. So some time passes, and funny enough, the house next door to them ends up going up for sale, and Lisa's sister Joyce ends up buying it.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, so now the family's overjoyed, like, wow, we're gonna have family immediately next door to us. This is great. Joyce moves in and everything is perfect. Lisa and Joyce catch up on everything, and Lisa tells Joyce about these wacky imaginary friends that Heidi has developed. First, this old man named Mr. Gordy, and then this bloody man named Khan. The two even kind of joked about it a bit, like, hey, maybe it's a ghost, huh? Wink, wink. But they obviously didn't take it seriously. But Lisa was intrigued enough that she asked Joyce in her spare time to see if she could find out who the previous owners of the house were. Remember, they didn't really know who the previous owners were. They just seemed to have up and left. So Joyce reaches out to the realtor. I'm assuming maybe it was the same realtor she bought her house from that sold this other house. And she asked who lived in Lisa's house before them. And she said it was owned by a woman named Kelly. So she goes and meets up with this Kelly woman. And Kelly tells her that before she owned the house, it was owned by an old man named James Gordy.
I mean, hello.
Hello.
We all saw this coming. We all knew that this was coming.
Oh, yeah.
But now it's official.
It's official. Mr. Gordy. James Gordy had worked as a real estate investor in the nearby town of Columbus, Georgia. And how Kelly's family knew him was he had helped out with her mother as she got older in life. He was actually an executor of her will. And big shout out to the Archduke of Attitude, Adam Archer. Columbus, Georgia is his hometown.
That's right. Shout out.
Well, Joyce asked Kelly, did this man move back to the area? How do we get a hold of him? And wouldn't you know it, dadgummit, James Gordy passed away all the way back in 1974. 15 years earlier. So Joyce was a little shocked by this, and so she goes back and lets Lisa know all of this, and Lisa's like, holy shit. After some thought, Lisa thought it was probably a good idea to sit down with Heidi and tell her imaginary friend is actually a man who used to live in the house who had passed away, which, well, Lisa is taken aback when after she tells Heidi about Mr. Gordy, Heidi, the first thing she says and asks is if they could go visit the grave where Mr. Gordy is buried. So Lisa is like, okay, it's a little weird, but sure. So she does a lot of searching. She goes to like the local library, looks through all that microfiche.
Oh, yes. It's the 80s, baby.
That's right. She finds out where this Mr. Gordy was laid to rest. So they go to this cemetery. They don't have any idea where in the cemetery he's buried, but they just know that he's somewhere in there. They get there, and Heidi hops out of the car and somehow, like in a sprint, runs exactly to where the grave was.
That's so creepy. Oh, God.
Almost as if she was being led there. And here's the kicker. Heidi's 3 and apparently couldn't really read yet. So it's not like she could read the tombstone,
right.
James Gordy. Yeah. So now Lisa's thinking that this is probably truly something supernatural that they're dealing with. Lisa decides she's just going to get in touch with Kelly, the former owner, herself, and chat and tell her about the weird things going on. So she does, and Kelly actually happily agrees to come over and brings with her some old photographs as well. So Kelly comes over and they lay out these photographs, and with no prompting whatsoever, Heidi points to one of the men in the pictures and says, "That's Khan." Kelly's surprised and says, well, actually, his name is Lon. He was my uncle. Well, Lon had passed away from cancer all the way back in 1957, but here's the kicker. Earlier in his life, he had lost his hand in a cotton gin accident. He worked on a cotton gin, which is a very dangerous piece of machinery.
Yeah.
But that would explain the injured hand and covered in blood. And
Wow.
even though she thought his name was Khan, it was Lon, so maybe she just misheard or...
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's not like that far of a jump, clearly.
Exactly.
Clearly, that could just be just a misunderstanding. Oh, so weird.
Wild. So now both Lisa and Andy are feeling pretty freaked out. Not that they weren't before, but Andy in particular was more afraid that it was some local creeper stalking his daughter and not some ghost from beyond the grave. Neither of them had dealt with anything like this before, and they thought that maybe if Heidi had some kind of distraction, she wouldn't focus as much on her invisible friends and perhaps it would all just go away. So they decided to get Heidi a dog.
Oh, cute.
And this dog was apparently very sweet. It loved the family loved it, but right away, Lisa began to notice the dog behaving strangely around the house. It would often stare and bark at things that no one else could see.
Oh,
We see
this
that
is
a lot.
so classic.
It would also sometimes act scared and whimper with its tail between its legs, or sometimes they'd find the dog growling at something with its hair standing on end. Very creepy stuff, of course.
Ooh.
One day, Lisa's niece, I believe her name was Kelly Brown, she was over visiting the family. She would sometimes visit and help, if Lisa had her hands full, help with Heidi, stuff like that. And she was an eyewitness to many of this weird stuff with the dog. And unfortunately, though, while this dog did seem to love the family, one day it ran off, never to be seen again.
Oh.
It must have been like, get me the hell out of here.
That's sad.
So don't know if the dog died, but we know it ran away. But hopefully it found a new home and all that jazz.
Yeah.
Now, up until this point, aside from the things Heidi would tell them, and of course the dog acting strange, Lisa and Andy themselves had not really experienced any paranormal weirdness firsthand. Well, that was about to change.
Oh, shoot.
It started mildly enough, as those things do. They'd be in the living room or somewhere, and they would hear the cabinets in the kitchen open and close. And, unless everyone's in the living room together, you hear the sound of cabinets and you just assume one of the family members in there doing stuff. But
Right.
Since Andy would be at work in the day and it was just Lisa and Heidi at the house, it became all too apparent that the family was not alone.
Oh, shit.
Well, one day, Lisa and Heidi are hanging out in the living room, and on this day, Lisa's niece, Kelly Brown's there again. And Lisa and her niece are just sitting there on the couch watching Heidi play on the floor, and Lisa begins to get this bad feeling. But she can't quite understand why. She just tries to do her best to ignore it, when all of a sudden, right before their very eyes, a chair spins around, slides across the floor, and draws right up next to the three of them.
Oh my God.
The best way Lisa could describe it was if it wasn't necessarily menacing, it was as if someone had pulled up a chair to join them and sit with them.
Right.
Like it was just part of the group. Pull up a chair.
Wow.
Of course, this freaks the hell out of everybody, and she tells Andy what happened, and Andy believes her, but at the same time has no idea what to do and just tells her, let's try to do our best not to let it get the best of us, like let it bother us too much. Now, just a side note, I know, who knows how anyone will react to this sort of stuff.
Totally.
And also consider the family, this was their first time buying a house. It's a big life step. They probably couldn't afford to just up and leave.
Oh, totally.
Especially also consider despite all the weird shit, they loved the area. Their sister Joyce is living next door. They're not just going to up and leave.
And at this point, things aren't really that bad.
Right, exactly. But, of course, things began to escalate as they do.
Oh gosh, these things always escalate.
Late one night, Lisa and Andy are getting around for bed. Not long after getting in bed, Andy's just out like a light. He's asleep. And Lisa's laying there about to drift off herself. And just as she's drifting off, she hears something. It sounded like voices coming from above them. Like they were on the ceiling or maybe in the attic. And keep in mind, this is a one-story house. So if it's coming from somewhere, it would have to be the attic. And spoiler alert, I don't even know if this house has an attic.
Right.
And if it does, how big it is, if people can even get up there. And some sources she would describe it sounded like it was right above her. Mm-hmm. Like in the same room, but above her.
Just above, yeah. Oh, that's so creepy. Oh, God.
But nevertheless, Lisa could hear these voices not only talking, but they seemed to be talking about her. And it was clear enough she could hear her name being said in conversation. Never quite understand what they were saying about her, but she knows her name was getting mentioned.
What in the ding-dong hell is that about?
Well, this would go on night after night, and Lisa could barely get any sleep because she was freaked out. Strangely enough, the Wyrick family had recently begun attending a local church. From the documentary, it almost looked, I don't know what their faith was. It looked like some sort of a Pentecostal thing. I have no idea what it was. But and Lisa made the choice to tell the pastor about what they were experiencing and if such a thing as ghosts were even possible. Well, this pastor may have inadvertently made things worse because he told Lisa, well, in his opinion, there's no such thing as ghosts, but there are such things as angels and demons. Well, crap. Now Lisa's extra terrified and can't sleep at night because she's afraid that there may be demons in the house.
Oh,
There was one occasion in particular that really freaked Lisa out. She was in her bedroom one night, blow drying her hair, and Heidi was in there with her. And Heidi tells her Mom, there's something I want to tell you, but I don't want you to get upset. And Lisa's, of course, like, well, honey, what is it? And Heidi tells her, there's a man standing right behind you. And of course, this was someone Lisa could not see, but freaky.
This is so classic. You know, you got this little girl who can see things that the rest of the family can't see, and it's escalating in a way that is freaking me out.
And it's interesting. You'll notice how the dynamic of this haunting changes. It's pretty fascinating. So now I just want to briefly take a moment and kind of look at where we are in the scheme of things. As we know, the family just can't pick up and move, but the bright side was that Mr. Gordy was really the only ghost she had mentioned seeing other than Con or Lon that one time.
Right.
And she had never specified that they were good or bad, but from what they sensed, Mr. Gordy seemed to be benevolent. But Heidi would soon tell her parents that something else was visiting her. Something not good. A shadowy dark figure that had no face.
Oh my God, our Faceless Phantoms episode.
Faceless Phantoms, folks, go listen to it. Most often, this shadow figure would manifest in Heidi's room, and she knew it was about to appear because Heidi would always get the chills, like the temperature would suddenly drop.
Oh, fuck.
One time in particular, Heidi's hair was pulled so hard it made her scream and cry, of course. And by now, both Andy and Lisa are fully on board that this is something supernatural, but for the time being, their plan was just to put on a brave face for Heidi and hope that things would get better. But baby, wouldn't you know it, things would get worse before they got better.
Oh, yeah.
One night in the middle of the night, Heidi gets out of bed and goes to her parents' room. She wakes up her mom saying, Mom, my face burns. Lisa turns on the light and sees 3 deep scratches on Heidi's face.
Oh God, 3.
It looked like they were claw marks, and of course, 3. We know what that means. Without hesitation, the family gets out of bed and they drive to a relative's house where they would stay for the night. Determined not to be run out of their house, though, the family returned the very next day. And that very night, upon their return, Andy, the husband, wakes up in the middle of the night with a burning pain on his side. He said the pain was like a burning sensation and it felt like his skin was on fire. And of course, he gets up, goes to the bathroom mirror, pulls his shirt up, and 3 claw marks on his side. Over the next several consecutive nights, Andy would wake up with a burning sensation, and somewhere else on his body would be these scratches. One night it was his legs, the other night his back. Every time he would check, and there would be 3 deep claw marks. Andy was at the point where he was just considering just taking the family and, like the people before him, just abandoning the house altogether.
Yeah.
Finances be damned. Now, near the brink, Lisa is not quite ready to give up just yet. You see, the local library where she had done all her research to find James Gordy, the librarian there, gave her a list of names and places that sort of worked with the paranormal. So she reaches out to one man in particular, a parapsychologist named Dr. William Roll. Now, Dr. Roll was a psychologist who studied at Oxford and various other places, not just some crackpot.
Right.
A very learned man.
Learned.
Well, the first thing Roll did was meet the family and make some basic observations. He had to make sure that this wasn't an outright hoax, or he had to determine that this also wasn't just a matter of maybe mental illness or something. He said right away the family appeared to be sane and truly concerned about what was happening to them. What was most convincing to him was that Heidi still seemed to have actually no concept of what a ghost even was. To her, these spirits, like James Gordy, appeared to her as real and solid as we do to each other. She couldn't really even grasp what a ghost was at her age. So this was really a convincing point for Dr. Roll. Dr. Roll thought that Heidi may be experiencing what is a theoretical phenomenon in the field of parapsychology known as place memories, kind of like what we've talked about in previous episodes.
Yeah.
Here is the exact definition of place memory from a website called informant.com. This is just the dry definition of it.
Place memory appears to involve the storage of information by the environment, which can be retrieved through paranormal means. This concept has been around since the inception of parapsychology. In recent years, it has been generally accepted that it is the living, not the dead, that appears somehow to be involved in the creation of place memory. Unfortunately, although some theories have been proposed for how place memory works, none of them are definitive. Heath, 2004, recently proposed that it might aid our understanding of the phenomenon to consider the possibility that there may be two ways by which place memory is created. One active through psychokinesis and other passives occurring more often with proximity, recency, and frequency of repetition. The theory is discussed that resonance might be the mechanism of action for the creation of passive place memory. Furthermore, recent advances in physics would suggest that this information, regardless of its method of creation, might not require any special psi field, but could be stored via the configuration of the atomic electron cloud and the geometric structure of molecules, including water.
So, long story short, it's kind of like what we've talked about, where this idea that maybe environments hold on to certain events, like the energy of certain events.
It's like a residual haunting, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Roll has an idea to test Heidi with. He shows her a series of 10 old photographs of a bunch of old men matching Mr. Gordy in appearance. Elderly, gray hair, dark suit, etc. And without hesitation, she was able to point out the real James Gordy. Will the real James Gordy please stand up?
Oh, please stand up, please stand up.
It was becoming apparent to him that whatever was going on, it might actually be a possible blend of things. Dr. Roll felt that the apparition of Lon, the guy with the bloody hand, wasn't so much an intelligent spirit haunting the place, but was a place memory sort of playing on a loop. In fact, Roll theorized that we may all have the abilities that Heidi does, it's just that for some reason it's more pronounced in certain people. Dr. Roll is quoted saying,
"She came up with physical descriptions and with names that she apparently could not have obtained in any ordinary way, so that immediately made me interested in the case. A couple of pictures have been found of Mr. Gordy. The hope was that Heidi would be able to identify Mr. Gordy's picture if they were presented to her with a number of other photographs. Having spoken to Heidi and her parents, I'm even more convinced that we are dealing with genuine parapsychological experiences. Then the question comes up, why are these things happening to this little girl?"
In fact, as wild as all this sounds, Dr. Roll was convinced that there actually may be a naturally occurring reason for what was going on. For example, when rock layers shift beneath the Earth's surface, it changes the dynamics of magnetic fields. And science has actually shown that these changes in magnetic fields can have effects on the human brain. Primarily the right temporal lobe, which can cause hallucinations. It's also possible that the human mind can be influenced by ions and other electrical charged particles in the air. Dr. Roll then assembled a team, and they performed various tests around the house and property. As for the temperature fluctuation, the temperature when they did their testing remained steady. There was no indication of anything weird with that. There was also no indication of any off-kilter magnetic fields, at that moment at least, but they can change, anytime. However, they apparently did detect a high amount of positively charged ions in Heidi's bedroom. Now, obviously, I don't understand how that actually, just know for this, I don't understand how that actually works, how that would theoretically work, so I'm not saying this, it might sound like I'm reading this with authority, but, or I'm saying this with authority, but I'm just reading my notes here.
Citizens, we are a lot of things, Dylan and myself, but scientists, we are not.
Absolutely. When all was said and done, Dr. Roll came to the conclusion that there were no ghosts at the property, but that the environment may be causing Heidi to have these visual hallucinations. On top of that, there was apparently a seismic fault line nearby that could further exacerbate the issue, he thought. Now, he also outright admitted that he had no explanation for why Heidi and her dad were waking up with scratches.
Right.
And nor did he have an explanation for why they saw a chair move across the room with their own eyes. And while the Wyrick family didn't think Dr. Roll's explanation explained everything, it did actually give them some relief.
Yeah, I think that this makes sense, a lot of what he's saying, because, the paranormal, things are only paranormal until they are able to be explained. And there are lots of things that seem paranormal in our world. That
Right.
A woman, or not just a woman, just anyone, being able to lift a car off of their child
Right.
or something like that. Like, that is real. That is something that can happen, and it's like an adrenaline thing. And
Right.
blah, 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 blah. So, like, there are things that seem paranormal that are real, but at the same time, it feels like he's kind of jumping through a lot of hoops that basically is saying that this is a ghost.
Yeah,
This is a haunting. It's just, you are just explaining it. What is actually happening that causes that to be a haunting? Like,
right.
We're saying that it's hallucinations that can happen when there are these seismic shifts and things like that, but maybe we've talked about this before, like the idea that things are happening in your head, but that doesn't mean that it's not real.
Right.
It just means that you are able to access it. So it's like, maybe these things aren't hallucinations, quote unquote, the way that we think of hallucinations.
Right.
Like, these are things that she's just able to access because of her brain
Right.
is reacting in a certain way to these outside natural
Right.
influences. But then also, like, maybe Lon, I could see being just like a naturally occurring thing on a loop.
Right.
I could see that, but with Mr. Gordy, she actually had like conversations with this thing.
Yes.
So that makes it seem like that would be more of an intelligent haunting. Mr. Gordy doesn't seem as much like a residual haunting to me.
Exactly. And you already kind of explained it, almost like a radio, how you might be listening to one station, but then a station that's like far out kind of bleeds into it. It's almost
Right.
like especially in the case with this lawn, like maybe if Heidi is essentially like a radio, she's picking up this frequency that's not actually alive and sentient. It's just like a replay of like a signal, essentially.
Right.
Which is what you just said. Well, a few years would pass, and Lisa would become pregnant with their second child, a girl named Jordan. And while they were thrilled about it, there was something about her getting pregnant that seemed to make the activity escalate drastically. And not just escalate, but it seemed to attract something dark as well. But on the flip side, as the years passed, Heidi would see Mr. Gordy less and less, and by her teenage years, no longer saw him anymore. Unfortunately, though, now they were dealing with all sorts of different kinds of entities. She was still seeing entities, just not Mr. Gordy anymore. The shadow faceless entity in particular. One day when Heidi got off the bus coming home from school, she saw the shadowy faceless entity standing on the porch of her Aunt Joyce's house next door.
Oh.
It seemed to look at her for a moment before turning and walking directly through the wall into the house.
Ooh.
As time went on, it became local gossip that the Wyricks were haunted by spirits. Even the local media took interest, and one day a reporter from a local paper had stopped by to interview the family. He had scheduled with it beforehand, so it wasn't like he was ambushing them. But as he pulls up in the driveway, he's getting out of his car, approaching the house. He stops dead in his tracks. He just had this feeling that there was something watching him from the window.
Oh, God.
A dark presence. He immediately turned around and left, saying he would not go inside that house. After this was when the gossip really kicked into high gear. And it was not easy for Heidi. She would get made fun of mercilessly by people at school.
Oh, come on.
Calling her ghost girl or whatever, you might call someone. She did have one close friend. She had more than one friend, but she had one close friend in particular, a girl named Maureen Bryant. And she actually would be witness to much of the activity as well. But shit was about to kick into high gear.
Oh, God.
One day, Lisa's niece, Kelly, is over again for another visit. They're just chatting about stuff in the living room when they hear the sound of voices coming from down the hall. But the only ones at home at that time were Lisa, her niece, Kelly, and Lisa's youngest daughter, Jordan. Heidi wasn't even home. So she goes to investigate, and she sees Jordan talking to somebody. And Jordan at this time, I think, is only about 3 or 4, roughly the same age her sister was when she started seeing shit. She goes down the hall and says, "Hey, Jordan, who are you talking to?" And she says, "The little girl." And Lisa's like, what little girl? Because the room that they're in is empty. And Jordan says, the one who got killed in the car accident. So now Lisa is terrified, just like she had been before. The family had taken some solace in the idea that Dr. Rolls had given them, this theory that the haunting was tied up to the house itself and the environment, not the actual family. But now, with Jordan seeing spirits, they're once again scared that it might be something haunting the family specifically. Joyce, the aunt, was able to confirm this as she had a terrifying experience herself. One night, she was alone at the house when she heard what sounded like a little girl laughing.
Oh, fuck.
Also, in the documentary especially, it didn't specify if this is Joyce in her own house or if Joyce was at Lisa's house next door.
Oh, okay.
Because what's interesting is Heidi did see that faceless entity walk into Joyce's house.
Right.
So I guess, so just for the sake of clarity, I'm not sure if this took place in Joyce's house or in Lisa's house next door, but either way, it happened to Joyce.
Yeah.
She's alone at the house and she hears what sounds like a little girl laughing. When she follows the sound, she caught a glimpse of what looked like a little girl in one of the rooms before the door suddenly slammed shut on its own. A moment later, she opens the door only to find the room empty, of course. And now this next part, I'm not sure if they just added this to the documentary's reenactment just for the sake of drama, but right after she opens the door to find the room empty, down the hall, a bedside lamp in one of the other rooms is flickering. So she went to it and tried turning it off and on, but it just kept flickering. So she unplugs it, but to her horror, the lamp kept flickering. Something that needs to be noted is Heidi said she could always tell immediately if a spirit was good or bad. And she said she had honestly never, even though she had seen this girl and stuff, had honestly never given this little girl all that much thought. She just saw her as a typical little girl. She didn't seem to have an agenda, either
that's good
or bad.
Yeah.
So that's something interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely people with agenda
that's
about to show up.
Oh, shit.
Of course, Lisa's not convinced. The voices that had been plaguing her night after night were only getting worse and worse. They sounded deep and gravelly and demonic. They would keep her up all night. Sometimes she would even try to wake up Andy, but it was like he was unable to. She'd often just lay there and cry until morning came. Awful. What an awful,
Yeah, that's so sad. These chodes.
I know, right? Well, by now, the family has been living in this house for what's going on about a period of 10 years now.
Oh my God.
And as the activity seemed to be growing darker and more sinister, of course, they were getting more and more terrified. Because like in one ear, their pastor is telling them that there's no such thing as ghosts. And in the other ear, Dr. Roll had told them that there were natural explanations for what was happening. Desperate, the family reached out to Dr. Roll one more time. The last time Dr. Roll had been out to see the family, the activity was really only being experienced by Heidi. Now they had another daughter who was experiencing things, and Lisa's hearing these voices, and Dr. Roll was intrigued, so he flies out to meet the family right away. Well, he sits down with the family and they get him caught up on all the strange stuff going on. And keep in mind, Heidi is still having experiences too. She just wasn't seeing Mr. Gordy anymore, like I said. She told of one time she was recently in the shower. She was at home alone and she heard what sounded like an old woman laughing, like this old woman was standing right outside the shower. Of course, she opened the shower door and no one's there. She also told about a man sitting on her mother's bed, only to look back and the man would be gone. And she would see it in her corner of her eye, look back, and they would be gone. Now, Dr. Roll 100% believed the family, but he was also convinced that these were not really ghosts. He believed that aside from fluctuating magnetic fields and high levels of positive ions, both Lisa and Heidi were both psychic and able to pick up on these phenomena. In Dr. Roll's view, ESP and various other psychic abilities are actually scientifically grounded phenomenon that we just don't have much understanding of yet. He's thinking it's one of two things. It's either a combination of magnetic fields and positive ions, or it's somehow a genetic family trait. Consider how all these members of one family have been seeing these experiences. Andy, though, he gets those scratches, but he hasn't seen or heard anything.
Right.
He believes them, of course. So that's why he's wondering maybe it's something on Lisa's side of the family, something genetic. Well, going off that idea, Dr. Roll travels to the hometown where Lisa grew up and interviews members of her family, including her father, and what he discovered were strange incidents of paranormal activity that had been happening in the family across generations. Her father even recounted seeing an apparition of a little girl before himself. He said she looked like a completely normal girl, not see-through or hazy, anything like that, but like a solid human being. In fact, Lisa's mother was from a town in northwestern Georgia that had become known as Hainted Holler, or AKA Haunted Hollow.
Oh.
This was not the name of the town, but it's what it had come to be known as. Well, where Lisa's mother grew up sat right along what is known as the Trail of Tears. Now, obviously, the Trail of Tears is a vast, huge, and very sad subject. Just very briefly, from the 1830s to the 1850s, the American government forced over 60,000 Native Americans out west to be relocated, and along the way, countless died. It was ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
Countless died along the way.
Absolutely disgusting stuff.
Obviously, as I said, this is a huge, complex, awful topic that I'm just condensing into a short blurb for the sake of context for the episode. And also, I know that it's a common trope to try and attach Native American history to paranormal stories like,
right.
Native American burial grounds, all that stuff. Not trying to do that at all. But it's probably worth noting that if we go by Dr. Roll's theory that environments can hold on to memories.
Right.
Did this affect Lisa's family? Who knows? But Lisa and Joyce could both remember strange things happening there. Joyce even told of a cave that was not far from the property that they would apparently often hear screaming coming from, screaming and wailing.
Reminds me of Hellier.
I know, right? And of course, they'd investigate and, no one would be there. I'm assuming they weren't going deep into the cave. But these screams and wails would go on for years. So by now, the Wyrick family and Dr. Roll are standing firmly in two separate beliefs. The Wyricks are beginning to think this thing is demonic. Whatever's going on is demonic. Dr. Roll does not believe in the existence of spirits, whether it's demons or ghosts, any of that, but believes that it's their psychic abilities causing them to have these experiences. The sources don't state this, but the Wyrick family was clearly very religious, as I said, and were hesitant. A lot of these communities, they're quick to label anything psychic as evil.
Yeah.
Anything that has to do with that often quickly gets labeled as evil or as a product of the devil. So Dr. Roll was determined to get the family comfortable with the idea of being psychic, and even set them up with a visit by an accomplished medium. And this medium had very strict guidelines to follow. They couldn't have any contact with the medium before she arrived, and they had to leave before she got there. This was so she could get a read on the place without any outside influence. Mm-hmm. And holy smokes, it turned out this medium was none other than Amy Allen of the Dead Files.
The Dead Files, what a show. Oh my God, such a fun show.
Let's reach out. We should reach out to Amy Allen, see if we can get her on and ask her about the Wyrick.
Yeah.
We love Dead Files. Such a fun show.
Such a great show.
Immediately on her arrival, Amy could sense paranormal activity, not just in the house, but all over the property. The first being she encountered was someone she would refer to as the caretaker. She could immediately sense that this entity was good and was actually protecting the family and the home from the more devious entities.
Oh.
Once they headed inside, the first entity she encountered was the little girl. She said she appeared in such a solid state that for a moment she thought it was like one of the kids.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. According to her, manifestations this solid are quite rare. This little girl was also benevolent. She sensed that this girl was good. But then she encountered a more nefarious spirit. Specifically, and this is weird, hold on for this, she described it as being one entity that consisted of 3 different parts. 2 elderly men and 1 young man who was shadowy and had no face.
Oh, fuck. This no-face motherfucker.
Somehow these 3 entities combined, I guess, to form a single negative presence, from what I could understand from what she was saying. Maybe I misinterpreted it, but interesting. Amy agreed with Dr. Roll on some things, but maintained that spirits were there as well. Yes, the location had heightened energy that was conducive to this sort of thing, but Lisa and her daughter were apparently, from what Amy could also tell, were also mediums. That means even if they were to move, they would probably continue to experience things. Maybe not these exact spirits, but they would always have these experiences.
Yeah.
Amy told the family of her findings, saying that while there were negative, angry spirits in the house, none of them were demonic. But still, Lisa was not having it. She was convinced it was demonic. So Lisa reaches out to another medium, one that shared their Christian faith. So this man, who's a medium, he claimed to be able to sense spirits and be able to determine whether they were demonic or not. But he could not, he explained, see them or interact with them. He could just sense them. So not like what Amy has, a different kind of psychic. Mm-hmm. Of course, when he visits, he senses a few demonic presences, both in Lisa and Andy's room and in Heidi's room. But he also sensed that these demonic entities were in a struggle against a good entity. Interestingly, the medium said that Jordan's room felt all clear, but that a demonic entity would stand at the doorway that wanted in but seemed unable to. And finally, he claimed that there was a portal. The family's fireplace in the living room was a portal from which these entities would enter and exit.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. The family chose to turn to their church for help, and the church embraced them with open arms. Their pastor, Stephen Shelley, anointed the family with oil and prayed over them. He even came over to pray with the family and bless the house. And at first, they thought it was all over. But that same night, after the pastor left and the family had gone to bed, Heidi suddenly woke up in a state of terror. She felt there was something evil standing at the foot of her bed, when suddenly she felt something grab her leg, lift her out of bed, and she was held upside down over her bed. She begins, of course, screaming and crying, and her family comes running in, and they too see her floating in midair upside down above her bed. Well, that was that. The family sold their house and got out of there. Heidi would continue to see spirits for the rest of her life, but the activity greatly reduced after leaving. And really, where the documentary ends is there, each party really had their own theories as to what was happening. The Wyricks thought it was demonic. Amy Allen thought none of the spirits were demonic, but there were spirits there, and that Lisa and Heidi were mediums. In particular, Heidi in particular was what she called a physical medium. And Dr. Roll thought it was place memories and the family's psychic abilities to sense them. You know, where the documentary ends, Lisa says the activity has actually gotten a lot better. Things don't happen as often as they used to. Heidi went on to college, got married, and actually has children of her own now. So, but a very interesting tale. This was made into a movie. I never saw it, but so you know that there was a movie called A Haunting in Connecticut.
Yeah.
It was a sequel. It's called A Haunting in Connecticut 2, Ghosts of Georgia, which has to be the dumbest title.
Yeah, Jesus
Just call it A
Christ.
Haunting in Georgia. I get why they wanted to attach that other name.
Right, exactly.
If it had cachet.
Yes.
But like, that's the dumbest title I've ever heard.
So it's like, so it's not A Haunting in Connecticut, actually.
Yeah.
It's in Georgia, you dumb fuck.
Wild.
But Dylan, thank you so much for doing all that research. What a freaky story. And one of those stories, too, where it turns out, like, a lot of these things, they just kind of stop and kind of peter out on their own. This wasn't fully on their own. I mean, they moved out of the house. But But things just kind of slow down a little bit as time goes on. So, what a crazy, freaky story. If you guys have any theories or thoughts or anything about it, please feel free to reach out to us on any of our socials, or you can email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com.
Well, we're about to infest your ears with the names of some demons.
Oh my God.
Citizens, here are the names of your top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream, James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vuren, the arch-nemesis Aaron Bird, the sadistic Sergio Castillo, the rapscallion Ryan Crum, and the Beast Benjamin Juan.
Wow, you know I love listening to those names. It gets me where I need to go. It gives me spirit and it gives me life.
If you'd like to join that group of titans, you just head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast for all sorts of goodies. Of course, like, rate, subscribe on whatever you listen to us on. Hit us with a 5 stars. Of course, tell friends, family, loved ones. Evangelize the name of Creep Street, baby.
That's right. Please do. Thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.